Barcelona had just spent more than €80 million on a winger who scored only 6 Premier League goals. That sentence alone should sound wrong. Not controversial. Wrong. Because clubs usually spend that kind of money on certainty. On players whose numbers leave no room for debate. Players who arrive with evidence attached to their reputation. Anthony Gordon arrived with questions. Lots of them. Some Newcastle supporters believed he had just completed the most impressive European campaign of his career. Others looked at the same season and saw something very different. A winger whose reputation had accelerated faster than his production. Barcelona saw a player worth building around. A large section of English football saw a player still trying to prove he belonged at the very highest level. Both groups could not be right, and that contradiction sits at the center of this entire story. Because if Barcelona had signed a 30-goal forward, nobody would be asking these questions. If they had signed an established world-class superstar, nobody would be dissecting the logic. But Anthony Gordon is not arriving at Barcelona because of what he has already proven. He is arriving because of what Barcelona believe modern football is becoming. That distinction matters, perhaps more than any statistic attached to his name. For decades, elite recruitment followed a relatively simple principle. The biggest clubs bought the biggest performers. Goals, assists, trophies, individual awards. The evidence was visible. Modern football is becoming far more complicated. Managers now obsess over actions that rarely make headlines. The press that forces a turnover. The run that creates space for somebody else. The recovery sprint that prevents a counterattack before it begins. The movement that destabilizes an entire defensive structure without touching the ball. These moments rarely appear in highlight compilations. Yet they increasingly determine who wins football matches. And few managers embody that shift more than Hansi Flick. When Flick arrived in Barcelona, many expected a continuation of familiar ideas. Possession, control, patience. The traditional image people associate with Barcelona football. Instead, something else started to emerge. The football became faster, more vertical, more physically demanding. Possession remained important, but it was no longer the destination. It became a weapon, a platform used to create attacks quicker and punish opponents more aggressively. That evolution changed the type of player Barcelona needed. Suddenly, recruitment was no longer focused purely on technical artists. The club needed runners, pressers, athletes, players capable of sustaining intensity across 90 minutes, players willing to do work that would never appear on a scoresheet. And that is where Anthony Gordon enters the conversation. Because his greatest quality has never been elegance. It has never been creativity. It has never been individual brilliance. His greatest quality is disruption. He makes games uncomfortable. For defenders, for fullbacks, for entire defensive structures. He presses relentlessly. He attacks space aggressively. He forces opponents into decisions they do not want to make. The most valuable part of Anthony Gordon's game may actually be the part that never appears on a stat sheet. That is the part Barcelona believe they are buying. Yet even that explanation feels incomplete. Because there is another clue hidden beneath the transfer itself. A clue that becomes impossible to ignore once you start looking for it. Barcelona's recruitment strategy keeps leading back to the same player. Not Anthony Gordon. Lamine Yamal. The club's future already revolves around him. Opponents know it. Managers know it. Defenders know it. Every week, opposition game plans become increasingly focused on limiting his influence. That creates a new challenge. Barcelona no longer need to discover their next superstar. They may already have him. The challenge now is creating conditions where that superstar becomes even more dangerous. And that changes how this transfer should be viewed. Perhaps Anthony Gordon was never signed to become the face of the project. Perhaps he was signed to strengthen it. The relentless running, the pressing, the willingness to stretch defensive lines, the ability to occupy defenders on the opposite side of the pitch. All of those qualities create something every elite attacker craves. Space. And if Gordon can create more space for Yamal, Barcelona may see value that traditional statistics completely miss. That is the theory. The problem is that football history is filled with beautiful theories. Not all of them survive reality, because while Barcelona see a tactical solution, many observers still see a risk. They see a player whose Champions League numbers may tell only part of the story. They see inconsistency. They see unanswered questions. They see a transfer fee that raises expectations far beyond anything Gordon has previously experienced. And that is why this move has become so fascinating. It is not simply a debate about one player. It is a debate about football itself. About what matters most. Goals or structure, output or fit, star quality or system value. Barcelona believe they have found the answer. The rest of football remains unconvinced. To understand why one of the biggest clubs in Europe became so certain, we need to look beyond the transfer fee, beyond the headlines, and beyond the statistics that dominate the discussion. Because the player Barcelona think they are signing may not be the player most people are actually judging. The easiest way to misunderstand this transfer is to start with Anthony Gordon. The real story begins with Barcelona, because by the time Gordon appeared on the club's shortlist, something fundamental had already changed inside the project. For years, Barcelona's identity felt almost untouchable. Every manager arrived carrying the same burden. Preserve the style, protect the philosophy, maintain the image. Possession was not simply a tactic. It was part of the institution itself. The problem was that football outside Barcelona refused to stand still. The game became faster, more physical, more aggressive. The spaces became smaller. The pressing became smarter. And slowly, elite football started rewarding teams that could combine technical superiority with athletic intensity. Barcelona spent years trying to solve that problem. Some solutions worked. Many did not. Then Hansi Flick arrived. What made Flick interesting was not that he rejected Barcelona's footballing traditions. He understood something more important. Traditions only survive if they evolve. Almost immediately, subtle changes started appearing. The possession remained, but the tempo increased. The pressing became more coordinated. Transitions became more direct. The team looked less interested in controlling every second of a match and more interested in dominating decisive moments. That distinction sounds minor. Completely changes recruitment. Because once a team commits to playing with greater intensity, every position becomes interconnected. A striker who does not press affects the midfield. A winger who does not recover affects the fullback. One weak point can disrupt the entire structure. The modern elite game is built on collective effort. And Flick's Barcelona was moving further in that direction every month. This created a problem. Not a tactical problem. A squad-building problem. Barcelona's best players could execute the system. The question was whether the squad could sustain it. Across a full season, intensity drops. Injuries happen. Rotations become necessary. Elite teams are rarely defined by their strongest 11. They are defined by how little the level drops when changes are made. That reality pushed Barcelona toward a different type of recruitment strategy. The club was no longer searching exclusively for stars. It was searching for system preservation. Players capable of entering the team without forcing tactical compromises. Players who could maintain structure rather than change it. That idea explains why Anthony Gordon became attractive. But to understand why Barcelona valued him so highly, you have to go back before Newcastle. Back to Everton. Because Gordon's development followed an unusual path. Many young attacking players build their reputation through goals. Others through creativity. Gordon built his through effort. Even during Everton's difficult periods, coaches consistently trusted him. Not because he was the most polished player on the pitch. Because he never stopped running. The foundation of his game was always physical commitment. Pressing. Tracking runners. Competing in duels. Covering ground. The qualities managers notice immediately. Those traits became even more valuable after his move to Newcastle. Under Eddie Howe, Gordon entered one of the most physically demanding systems in English football. Newcastle wanted aggression, energy, pressure, relentless work without the ball. Suddenly, Gordon's natural strengths aligned perfectly with his environment. His development accelerated. Not because he transformed into a different player, because he finally entered a system that amplified the qualities he already possessed. That distinction matters. Great recruitment often happens when clubs identify players whose strengths are being underutilized elsewhere. Newcastle recognized it. Now Barcelona believe they have recognized it too. The evidence goes beyond simple attacking output. One of Gordon's defining characteristics became his willingness to press high and recover possession in advanced areas. Those actions rarely dominate headlines. They change matches. A turnover near the opposition penalty area can be more dangerous than a carefully constructed attack that begins 70 meters from goal. The best pressing teams understand this. Flick certainly does. And the deeper Barcelona looked into Gordon's profile, the more they found qualities that aligned with the direction the club was heading. The running, the work rate, the tactical discipline, the positional flexibility. Each piece started fitting together. Yet there was still a problem. A significant one, because Gordon was not the first name Barcelona had considered. In fact, the club's original plans reportedly pointed somewhere very different. The long-term objective was finding a successor to Robert Lewandowski, a marquee attacker, a statement signing, someone capable of becoming the next focal point of the attack. From a football perspective, the logic was obvious. Lewandowski remained influential, but time remains undefeated. Barcelona knew succession planning could not be delayed forever. The difficulty was financial reality. Elite strikers are among the most expensive assets in football. The players Barcelona admired were precisely the players everybody else admired too. Competition increased. Prices increased. The market became increasingly difficult to navigate. And that is where the first major turning point occurred. Barcelona stopped searching for the perfect star. They started searching for the perfect fit. That shift changed everything. Instead of asking who could replace one player, they began asking who could solve multiple problems simultaneously. Who could play wide? Who could press? Who could rotate positions? Who could support the existing structure? Who could improve the players already inside the team? The answer repeatedly pointed back toward Anthony Gordon. Not because he was the most glamorous option. Not because he possessed the strongest statistical profile. Because he solved more tactical questions than almost anyone else available. That is what makes this transfer so revealing. Barcelona were not behaving like a club chasing headlines. They were behaving like a club chasing functionality. The difference may seem small. It is enormous. One strategy buys names. The other buys solutions. And by the summer Gordon emerged as a serious target, Barcelona appeared increasingly convinced that modern football rewards the second approach. The problem is that identifying a tactical fit on paper is only the beginning. Because the qualities that make Anthony Gordon attractive also create the biggest doubts surrounding him. The same player who thrives in open space will soon face compact defensive blocks every week. The same player who flourished in Newcastle's environment will now enter one of football's most demanding ecosystems. And the next question becomes impossible to avoid. If Anthony Gordon is such a perfect tactical fit, why are so many people still unconvinced he will succeed? The argument for Anthony Gordon becomes strongest when the ball is lost. Not when Barcelona are attacking. Not when they are dominating possession. The moment that matters most arrives in the seconds after possession disappears. Because that is where modern football is increasingly decided. For years, elite football was built around what teams could create with the ball. Now it is increasingly defined by what teams do without it. The best sides do not simply attack well. They recover well. They react well. They suffocate transitions before they begin. And that is precisely why Hansi Flick values players like Anthony Gordon. The easiest way to understand Gordon's appeal is to stop thinking about him as a traditional winger. Think about him as a defensive weapon disguised as an attacker. That sounds strange. Until you watch him. The moment possession changes hands, Gordon's first instinct is rarely retreat. It is confrontation. Close the angle. Pressure the receiver. Force a rushed decision. Make the next action uncomfortable. Those details rarely appear on highlight reels. Coaches see them immediately. Throughout his development, Gordon built a reputation for being one of the most aggressive pressing wingers in English football. Even when playing for teams that spent long periods without possession, he consistently ranked among the most active wide players defensively. The consequence was simple. Opponents rarely enjoyed comfortable build-up play down his side. That matters enormously in Flick's structure, because Barcelona's press is not built around individual effort. It is built around collective synchronization. One player presses. A second player closes the passing lane. The midfield steps forward. The defensive line squeezes space. Everything depends on timing. One late runner can break the chain. One lazy recovery can expose the system. This is where Gordon becomes valuable. Not because he is spectacular, because he is reliable. The intensity remains constant. That consistency allows the structure around him to function. And once you start viewing Gordon through that lens, other parts of the transfer begin making more sense. Take Lamine Yamal. Most discussions around Yamal focus on what he does with the ball. The dribbling, the creativity, the unpredictability, the moments that fill social media. Barcelona's coaching staff must think about something else. How do you protect him? How do you maximize him? How do you prevent him from carrying too much responsibility too early? The answer may not be another superstar. It may be another worker. Every great attacker benefits from teammates who create favorable conditions. Players who stretch defensive lines. Players who occupy defenders. Players who force opponents into impossible choices. Gordon excels at exactly those actions. Imagine a defensive block attempting to stop Yamal on the right side. Now imagine a runner repeatedly attacking space on the opposite flank. The defensive line can no longer collapse exclusively toward one threat. The distances become larger. The decisions become harder. The spaces become more valuable. That is the hidden tactical appeal. Barcelona may not be buying Anthony Gordon to become the center of the attack. They may be buying him to make the center of the attack even more dangerous. Yet this is where the story becomes complicated. Because the same qualities that make Gordon attractive also create legitimate concerns. The Premier League and La Liga ask very different questions. In England, transitions appear constantly. Matches stretch. Spaces emerge. Physical advantages matter. At Newcastle, Gordon often operated in environments perfectly suited to his strengths. Open grass, direct attacks, fast breaks, defenders moving backwards. Those situations allow explosive athletes to thrive. Barcelona's reality will often look very different. Most opponents defend deep, very deep, sometimes with 10 players behind the ball. The spaces Gordon loves attacking simply do not exist. The game becomes compressed, crowded, patient. Suddenly the challenge is no longer beating defenders into open space. The challenge is creating space where none exists. That requires a different skill set, different decisions, different habits. And this is where skepticism begins. Not because Gordon lacks quality, because adaptation is rarely straightforward. One of the recurring criticisms throughout his career has centered on decision-making in tight areas. When space disappears, Gordon can become overly direct. Rather than recycling possession, he sometimes forces situations. Rather than combining quickly, he can hold the ball too long. Rather than choosing the simple option, he often backs himself. That confidence is sometimes an asset, sometimes a liability. The difference is usually context. At Newcastle, forcing the issue can create transitions. At Barcelona, forcing the issue can kill attacks. The margins become much smaller. This is the pressure phase of the story. Not external pressure. Football pressure. The pressure created when a player's natural instincts collide with a new tactical environment. Because every transfer contains a hidden battle. Not against opponents. Against habits. The player must decide which parts of his identity survive and which parts must evolve. For Gordon, that challenge may be larger than many people realize. His success will not depend entirely on speed, or pressing, or work rate. Those qualities already exist. The real question is whether he can become more efficient in possession. whether he can accelerate attacks when necessary and slow them down when required, whether he can recognize moments when the system matters more than the individual action. That is not an athletic adjustment. It is a cognitive one. And cognitive adjustments are often the hardest to predict. There is another concern too: temperament. Barcelona is one of the most demanding environments in world football. Every performance is analyzed. Every mistake is discussed. Every poor run becomes a storyline. At Newcastle, scrutiny existed. At Barcelona, scrutiny becomes permanent. Gordon has always been an emotional footballer. That passion drives many of his best performances. It has also occasionally created problems. Frustration becomes visible. Disappointment becomes visible. The emotional swings become visible. Supporters can forgive mistakes. What they rarely forgive is visible disengagement. And Barcelona's environment tests emotional resilience more aggressively than almost anywhere else in Europe. This is why the transfer has become such a fascinating recruitment case study. Both sides of the argument possess genuine evidence. Barcelona's C-pressing, athleticism, tactical flexibility, positional versatility, and structural value. The skeptics see inconsistency, adaptation risk, decision-making concerns, and a transfer fee that magnifies every weakness. Neither side is imagining things. Neither side is completely wrong. The disagreement exists because Anthony Gordon represents a larger question emerging throughout modern football. What matters more? Production or function? Goals or contribution? Numbers or impact? Because if Barcelona are correct, Gordon could become proof that elite football is increasingly won by players whose influence cannot be fully measured through traditional statistics. If they are wrong, this transfer will become another reminder that tactical theory and football reality are not always the same thing. And that tension only grows when we examine the evidence Barcelona used to convince themselves they had found the right answer. Because the deeper you look into Gordon's profile, the more one uncomfortable possibility begins to emerge. Perhaps Barcelona are not evaluating him like a winger at all. Perhaps they are evaluating him like something far more valuable. By the end of every transfer debate, football usually asks the wrong question. Did the player justify the fee? It sounds reasonable. It sounds logical. It is often far too simplistic. Because transfer fees measure cost. They do not always measure purpose. And Anthony Gordon's move to Barcelona may become one of the clearest examples of that distinction. For most of the discussion surrounding this transfer, attention has focused on the obvious details: the goals, the assists, the price tag, the concerns, the adaptation risks, the comparisons with previous expensive signings. Those conversations matter. They are not the most interesting part of the story. The most interesting part is what Barcelona appear to believe modern football is becoming. Because the deeper we examine Gordon's profile, the clearer something becomes. Barcelona were never searching for another superstar. They were searching for another mechanism. A player capable of helping the entire machine function more effectively. That idea feels almost strange in an era obsessed with individual statistics. Football culture increasingly treats numbers as the final argument. Goals become proof. Assists become proof. Expected goals become proof. Everything must be measurable. Everything must be visible. Yet some of the most valuable players in elite football create advantages that statistics struggle to capture. The forward who drags a defender away. The winger who forces a defensive line deeper. The midfielder whose positioning prevents counterattacks before they develop. The players who make everyone around them better. Barcelona appear convinced that Anthony Gordon belongs in that category. Whether they are right remains uncertain. Why they believe it is becoming increasingly clear. Throughout this story, one theme has appeared repeatedly. Not goals. Not flair. Not star power. Space. The creation of space. The protection of space. The manipulation of space. At the highest level, football often becomes a battle for territory rather than possession. The teams that control space usually control matches. That is why coaches obsess over movement. Why they obsess over pressing. Why they obsess over positioning. and why players can become incredibly valuable without dominating highlight reels. Viewed through that lens, Gordon's profile begins to look very different. The relentless pressing, the aggressive running, the willingness to attack depth, the constant physical pressure placed on defenders. None of these qualities guarantee success. All of them contribute to structure, and structure is increasingly the foundation upon which elite football is built. Perhaps that is what many people missed when evaluating this transfer. The discussion became trapped between two extremes. One side treated Gordon like an emerging superstar. The other treated him like an overpriced gamble. Neither description feels completely accurate, because Barcelona may not be buying Anthony Gordon the winger. They may be buying Anthony Gordon the system player. The distinction matters. One version must justify himself through numbers. The other justifies himself through influence. One is judged by goals. The other is judged by what happens around him. That changes the standard completely. It also explains why comparisons to previous Barcelona transfers feel incomplete. The fear is understandable. Barcelona supporters have experienced expensive disappointments before. Every major club carries scars. Failed signings create caution. Failed signings create doubt. Failed signings create memories that influence future decisions. But football rarely repeats itself in exactly the same way. Different coaches want different things. Different systems require different solutions. The mistake many clubs make is buying talented players without understanding how they fit together. Barcelona appear determined not to repeat that error. Whether they succeed is another matter entirely, because there is still a genuine possibility that the skeptics are correct. The concerns have not disappeared. The transition from England to Spain remains difficult. The decision-making questions remain real. The adaptation to low blocks remains uncertain. The emotional pressure of Barcelona remains enormous. No tactical theory can eliminate those risks. No recruitment department can fully predict human adaptation. Football remains too unpredictable for that. Yet uncertainty does not mean irrationality. And that is where this transfer becomes genuinely fascinating. The evidence suggests Barcelona are making a calculated gamble rather than an emotional one. They understand the weaknesses. They understand the risks. They simply believe the strengths matter more. That belief says as much about Hansi Flick as it does about Anthony Gordon. Because every great coach leaves fingerprints on recruitment. The players targeted reveal the manager's priorities. Under Pep Guardiola, recruitment often focused on technical intelligence. Under Jurgen Klopp, physical intensity became essential. Under Diego Simeone, mentality became non-negotiable. The Gordon transfer may reveal what Flick values most. Collective function, relentless effort, tactical commitment, the willingness to serve the structure before serving yourself. Those qualities rarely generate headlines. They generate winning environments. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson hidden inside this story. Modern football may be moving away from individual solutions. Not entirely. Superstars will always matter. Match winners will always matter. But the gap between elite teams is becoming smaller every year. Margins decide everything. Pressures, distances, movements, recoveries, details. The clubs that master those details increasingly gain the advantage. Barcelona appear convinced Anthony Gordon can help them gain that advantage. The irony is that if he succeeds, many people may never fully notice why. They will notice Yamal. They will notice goals. They will notice trophies. The most important contribution may happen quietly. A run that creates space. A press that forces an error. A recovery that prevents danger. The kind of action supporters celebrate for 5 seconds and coaches remember for 5 days. That possibility brings us back to the contradiction that opened this story. Barcelona spent more than €80 million on a winger who did not arrive with universal agreement. A transfer that looked obvious to some people looked baffling to others. Months from now, perhaps years from now, the outcome will decide which side was correct. But maybe that was never the most important question. The more revealing question is why Barcelona made the decision in the first place. Because if Anthony Gordon succeeds at Barcelona, The story will not simply be about one player adapting to one club. It will be evidence that elite football has changed, that the most valuable players are no longer always the most glamorous, that influence can matter more than output, that systems can matter more than stars, and that one of the biggest clubs in the world was willing to spend €80 million betting on that future before everyone else saw it.